Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we are diving into one of the most serious and widely discussed geopolitical questions of our time. What really happens if Iran and the United States go to war? This is not just a regional issue, it is a global one, with consequences that could reshape the Middle East, disrupt the world economy, and change international power dynamics for years to come. To understand the impact of a potential war, we first need to understand why tensions between Iran and the United States exist in the first place. The roots of this conflict go back decades, especially after the 1979 Iranian Revolution, when Iran shifted from being a U.S. ally to one of its strongest critics. Since then, mistrust, sanctions, proxy conflicts, and political pressure have defined their relationship. One of the biggest flashpoints between Iran and the U.S. has been Iran's nuclear program. The United States and its allies fear that Iran could develop nuclear weapons, while Iran insists its program is for peaceful energy and research purposes. This disagreement has led to years of sanctions, diplomatic negotiations, and threats of military action. If war were to break out, it would likely not start with a traditional declaration. Instead, it could begin with a trigger event, such as an attack on U.S. forces in the Middle East, a major strike on Iranian nuclear facilities, or a naval clash in the Persian Gulf. These small sparks could quickly ignite a much larger conflict. In the opening phase of a war, the United States would likely rely on air and naval power. Precision airstrikes could target Iranian military bases, radar systems, missile launch sites, and nuclear facilities. The goal would be to weaken Iran's ability to respond effectively and limit its command and control systems. Iran, however, is not defenseless. It has invested heavily in asymmetric warfare strategies. Instead of facing the U.S. directly in a conventional battle, Iran could use missiles, drones, cyber attacks, and proxy forces to strike back. U.S. bases in Iraq, Syria, and the Gulf region could become immediate targets. One of the most critical areas in such a war would be the Strait of Hormuz. This narrow waterway is one of the most important oil shipping routes in the world. A significant portion of global oil passes through it every day. Iran has repeatedly threatened to block or disrupt this route if attacked. If Iran attempted to close the Strait of Hormuz, even temporarily, global oil prices would likely skyrocket. This would affect not just the United States, but countries around the world. Fuel prices would rise, inflation could increase, and global markets could face serious instability. Another major consequence would be the involvement of regional players. Countries like Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates could be drawn into the conflict, either directly or indirectly. Israel, in particular, views Iran as a major threat and might launch its own strikes against Iranian targets. At the same time, Iran's network of allied groups across the Middle East would play a crucial role. Groups in Lebanon, Iraq, Yemen, and Syria could open new fronts against U.S. interests and its allies. This would turn the conflict into a widespread regional war rather than a limited bilateral clash. In Iraq, U.S. troops and facilities could face increased attacks from Iran-aligned militias. This would put the Iraqi government in an extremely difficult position, caught between two powerful forces fighting on its soil. Stability in Iraq, already fragile, could collapse further in Lebanon. Hezbollah could launch rockets and missiles toward Israel, triggering a devastating conflict along Israel's northern border. This could result in massive civilian casualties and widespread destruction in both Lebanon and Israel. In Yemen, the conflict could intensify as Iran-backed groups target Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states. Missile and drone attacks on oil facilities and cities could become more frequent, further destabilizing the region. Cyber warfare would also be a major battlefield in a U.S.-Iran war. Both sides possess significant cyber capabilities. Power grids, financial systems, communication networks, and government databases could become targets. These attacks might not be immediately visible, but their impact could be severe and long-lasting. Another key aspect would be economic warfare. The United States would likely tighten sanctions even further, aiming to isolate Iran completely from the global economy. Iran, already under heavy sanctions, would face immense pressure, leading to shortages, inflation, and economic hardship for its population. The humanitarian consequences of such a war would be enormous. Civilians in Iran and across the Middle East would suffer the most. Airstrikes, missile attacks, and infrastructure damage could lead to loss of life, displacement, and a shortage of essential services like food, water, and healthcare. Refugee flows could increase dramatically, with millions potentially fleeing conflict zones. Neighboring countries and even Europe could feel the impact of this humanitarian crisis, adding strain to already challenged systems. From the U.S. perspective, a war with Iran would be costly and risky. While the U.S. military is far more powerful in conventional terms, fighting Iran would not be quick or easy. Iran's size, population, and geography make it a difficult country to defeat decisively. Unlike past conflicts, this would not be a simple invasion or regime change operation. Iran has a strong sense of national identity, and an external attack could unite the population against a foreign enemy, even among those who oppose the government. Domestic politics in the United States would also play a major role. A prolonged war could become unpopular, especially if American casualties increase or economic consequences worsen. Public opinion could shift quickly, putting pressure on political leaders. On the international stage, major powers like Russia and China would be watching closely. While they might not intervene directly with troops, they could support Iran diplomatically, economically, or militarily. This could deepen global divisions and push the world closer to a new Cold War-style confrontation. Russia could see the conflict as an opportunity to expand its influence in the Middle East, while China would be deeply concerned about energy security, given its reliance on Middle Eastern oil. Both countries might push back against U.S. actions through international institutions. The United Nations would likely be a battleground of diplomacy, with emergency sessions, resolutions, and intense debates. However, meaningful action could be limited by veto powers and political disagreements among major nations. Another serious risk is escalation beyond control. Once a war begins, events can move rapidly and unpredictably. A single miscalculation or misunderstanding could lead to attacks on civilian targets, or even the use of more destructive weapons. There is also the concern about Iran accelerating its nuclear program in response to an attack. If Iran feels its survival is at stake, it might decide that nuclear weapons are necessary for deterrence, leading to even greater long-term instability. For ordinary people in Iran, life during such a war would become extremely difficult. Economic struggles would worsen, daily life would be disrupted, and fear would become constant. At the same time, anti-American sentiment could rise sharply, shaping attitudes for generations. For people in the United States, the effects might feel more distant at first, but they would still be real. Higher gas prices, economic uncertainty, and the emotional toll of another major war would affect millions of families. The Middle East, already one of the most unstable regions in the world, could be pushed into an even deeper crisis. Years of development could be undone, and the chances for peace in several ongoing conflicts could vanish. Despite all these dangers, it is important to remember that war is not inevitable. Diplomacy, dialogue, and international pressure have so far prevented a full-scale conflict between Iran and the United States. Even during moments of extreme tension, both sides have often stepped back from the brink. Negotiations, confidence, building measures, and regional cooperation remain possible paths forward. While these approaches are slow and often frustrating, they are far less costly than war. History shows us that once a major war begins, controlling its outcome becomes nearly impossible. The human, economic, and political costs are almost always far greater than expected. So when we ask what happens if Iran and the US go to war, the answer is not just about missiles and armies. It is about global instability, economic shockwaves, humanitarian suffering, and a future filled with uncertainty. Understanding these consequences helps explain why this conflict matters so much, not just to policymakers, but to ordinary people around the world. The hope remains that reason and diplomacy will prevail over destruction. As tensions rise and fall, the world continues to watch closely. The choices made by leaders today will shape the security and stability of tomorrow, and the cost of those choices will be felt far beyond the battlefield. In the end, a war between Iran and the United States would not have true winners. It would leave behind damaged nations, broken lives, and a more dangerous world. That is why the question is not just what happens if they go to war, but how such a war can be avoided. Thank you for watching, and if you found this explanation helpful, make sure to stay informed, because understanding global conflicts is the first step toward preventing them.